I'm using a marker pad. That's marker paper that can go in your croquis book. It's paper that you can use for your presentations, and it's also paper that you can use to do an illustration that's going to go in your portfolio. This paper is fairly translucent. You can see your sketches underneath, so if you wanted to redraw, to trace your own sketch, you can do that. It also tends to bleed color a little bit, so when you're working, put a sheet underneath here so that it won't ruin the sheet behind it. You can always put a slip sheet behind there. Color. Let's just take a basic color and do some rendering and figure out how the marker works. Color, I'm going to take color and I'm going to just fill in, scrubbing the color, going back and forth, keeping it nice and wet, and I'm going to go edge to edge. This would be tight color or finished color. When it's edge to edge, and I'm going as fast as I can, so I keep the color kind of wet, and that way it should be less likely to streak. That's flat, solid color. It's a solid color fabric, and it's an easy, quick rendering trick. Just to keep scrubbing the color, make it flat. Now you can also do something where you do partial rendering or loose rendering. This is called for roughs, your rough sketches. And what you do is you just kind of fill in, look for where the drape is or construction detail, and you fill in the color. That's loose. That's if I'm just doing a gesture sketch, or if I'm doing a sketch, it's the idea versus the finished sketch. I can also do it with a light source and tell you that light is coming from this direction, so I'm going to fill in based on if there were light shining on the fabric. Not to make it a shiny fabric, but I'm just saying for partial rendering reasons. And again, I'm still scrubbing, taking that color and making it as loose as possible. I'm working with the folds so that you can see the fabric move in and out, get a sense of volume and drape. I'm also going to take the color and go back and try the exact same thing again, but this time what I'll do is when I'm finished rendering, again, I'm kind of scrubbing and going with the drape, using gravity to my advantage. And I can go back, shadow. Marker shadow, I can take, if this is a nice deep red, I can take a 50 gray and put some color behind the folds like this, just to, again, pump that fold forward, or to work with some of the crush lines in the waistband. So that's dimensional. Now I'm starting to get into dimensional. You can also call that tonal. So what would tonal be? Tonal would be where I take the marker and I'm trying to make it the color darker. So when I do that, I'm adding a little bit, or I could just work with a darker red too, but if you don't have a darker red, you can just work it out with your gray. Now that's getting modulated. The color has more depth than the flat color. I can also take color and work it so that I get some kind of interest in the texture, as if there was some kind of crinkle or slubs. So it doesn't have to be flat rendering. It could also be that this was a knit, you know, and I'm working with all the ribs, giving you an impression of the surface again in the fabric. That could be a knit. Or if I take the edge and I work with a marker, and at this point I'm now creating a sense of weave. So the way you use your marker is a way to express your fabric, your color, your fabrication, your drape, your volume. All of that's going to come across in your fabric. Your rendering, marker rendering fabrics. Okay, over here I've got a big kind of like puffy skirt. Lots of color. I'm scrubbing it. Now I've got gathers. What am I going to do about the gathers? This means there's a lot of construction at the waistband where all those gathers happen. So I'm going to take my gray, go into this and work my way behind these folds. I want to pump that fabric forward. I'm trying to tell you how deep and lush and full this skirt is. So there, I've just pumped that forward. Something else I can do is layers. I can separate something by saying, okay, look, this upper bodice is separate from the skirt. Now I've colored them as if they were separate, which helps. But wouldn't it be better if I could give you a shadow, and that'll really give you a sense of depth? So this is a functional shadow. It's giving you a sense of this separates from that. This was giving you volume and construction. Now I'm going to take the color and tell you that something's pleated. So instead of just scrubbing, I'm now going to work with the panel. I'm going to tell you that that is a pleat, and that's a pleated panel. So it's important that I get a sense of that color being in a section, in a unit, a draped unit. So I'm telling you that's a pleated skirt, and then I can work my way up inside the pleat. Now I've given you information with color. Last, I'm going to tell you, you can get color to move with the fabric. So you drape with your grain or the direction of your pull. Like for instance, look at this. I am now going to color sideways because the fabric went sideways. Then these little ties that move out, I'm going to color in the direction. So each fabric move I follow. And if this fabric now just simply goes down, okay, this fabric I'll color in the direction of gravity. Shadow, I can use shadow and take the shadow to tell you where the fabric really crunched the most. I can tell you where the fabric overlapped, where it was on top of something. So that's how you make color work for you. Then I can go back in there. Now this is really talking about construction, volume, drape. It's about as full as you can get in a skirt, in detail, in construction, in the color for the fabrics. I have a basic solid color. I wanted to give you a context for the fashion design, the sketching, the figure work that we're going to do, and the color rendering. This is an example of a croquis book where you open up the croquis book as a sense of you, the designer. We get to your customer, the collage about who you want to dress, and then we get to the collage where we're looking at the customer profile, maybe the context for design inspiration, and your color sources, your fabrics. And after we've looked at all of this, then we start getting into your figure work. And when we're into the figure work, we're saying, well, what kind of figures are we going to use? Do we need to use flats? Is there more figure work that we've got to do? That always depends on the parameters of your project, but at this point what we're doing is looking at how do we draw and dress these figures. We also look at the paper in this kind of book, and the paper in this kind of book is pretty heavy. This is a marker, well, better watercolor paper, I would say, than for markers. But I'll show you how this works in the next segments. This is another kind of book that can also be a croquis book. This is the soft cover one. The soft cover one has very different paper in here. And if you're putting in your photographs, you're putting in your drawing, you very often take and lift papers. You kind of like tape them in. This whole thing becomes a real journal workshop kind of paper. You can put in folders. And this paper is much thinner. It's a whole different set of parameters when it comes to marker rendering, how it takes marker or watercolors. It's going to buckle a little bit with the watercolors. So we're going to look at different papers and how they react and what we can do with them. This is tracing paper, and I wanted to show you the marker paper because marker paper is something that we can draw on and then take this out and put it into our croquis books, our design journals. Tracing paper is this really super fine paper that we put over our sketches. So if I refer to tracing paper, this is what I'm talking about. It's not parchment, it's a different type. It's tracing paper, it's pretty thin. Markers, these are the markers that we're going to be using. We'll use a pen, we'll use pencil, so we get to use all of this in the next segment when we start working on our figures and color rendering.